Got it.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Michael Suarez, and as the Executive Director of Rare Book School, it's my privilege to welcome both our home audience and those who are watching online to our first lecture of the 2025 summer season, Fiat Looks.
Oh.
I am delighted to introduce our speaker this evening, Mindell Dubansky, who is author of numerous books and exhibition catalogs on the book and paper arts, among them Pattern and Flow, A Golden Age of American Decorated Paper, The Proper Decoration of Book Covers, The Life and Work of Alice C. Morse, Blooks, The Art of Books That Aren't, and The Best Kept Secret, 200 Years of Blooks. All will be revealed. The conservator for preservation and conservation at the Metropolitan Museum of Art's Watson Library, her personal collection of book objects and her research in this area have previously featured in exhibitions at the Grolier Club and the Metropolitan Museum of Art, pretty great venues, as well as in the New York Times and on CBS Sunday Morning. We are so pleased to inaugurate our summer session of public lectures by featuring Mindell Dubansky's collecting and scholarship. Please join me in warmly welcoming her.
Thank you, everybody, for coming in person and online. And it's an incredible honor to be giving a lecture to you at Rare Book School on my long journey of book collecting and understanding of the history of objects made in the form of books, which celebrates the objects that we all love so much and may wonder why we love them so much, which was my motivation for beginning this collection and doing this research. And it's a subject that would take me about a month long of lecturing to really share with you. But for this lecture today, when I spoke to Rare Book School, can you all hear me?
Yeah.
When I spoke to Rare Book School initially, I kind of asked them about maybe doing a course. They said, well, it's not really in our scope right now, but we would love to offer you a lecture, but we don't really understand how books relate to books. And I went, well, that's the subject of my lecture then. I'm going to tell you how books relate to books, because all books relate to books. But I made a particular selection for you of books that I think most closely relate, really have a strong connection, and are trying the hardest to be books in some way, because it's important for the makers of these objects to express themselves about our favorite object. And so first, I just want to define what the subject is to those of you who may not have already talked your ear off about it in some other venue, which I always do. So Blooks is a word, and I'm not attached to it in the sense that you can call them whatever you want, but for me, I use it to describe book objects, and it's a contraction of book look, because any other way you would say something that looks like a book but isn't is a whole sentence, and it takes too long. So, and I collected these things in a vacuum for 30 years before I ever talked to anybody about them, so that was my pet name. So everybody encouraged me once I came out of the closet and I had my show at the Grolier Club, that Blooks 101, which is really what I did at that time, that I just keep it, and that's what I did. So it's amusing. And so Blooks can be decorative and or useful objects, and they are normally three-dimensional, but not always. Sometimes they're two-dimensional. And Blooks, while not actual books, may include a page or two of text. So yeah, I'm flexible. So I wanted to explain to you a few things generalities that I feel would be useful for you to know about these objects. And I'm talking in this lecture, I'm really just talking about the codex, because there are scrolls, there are faux books of all formats around the world, but I focused on the codex for this talk. And of course, most of my collection and things I know about are in codex form. So the codex I believe that the codex form holds symbolic value far beyond the text. Depending on the type of codex represented, the form can communicate social status, knowledge, commemoration, love, friendship, many, many more things are all contained in that little package. Books are ubiquitous. They've been made I've tracked them for 1,000 years. And they've been made by people around the world for many purposes. In my experience, religion and humor are the earliest subjects. Bookmakers capitalize on well-known bookbinding formats and aesthetic styles of books and popular authors, titles, and publishing trends. So they generally closely follow publishing trends if they're making books that resemble books of that period, but very often they go back to the ancient times and they make books that look like manuscripts or, choral books or things like that. And making books has always been a sideline of hand and commercial bookbinders. And books rarely, in my experience, but they do exactly imitate real books. I've included examples of actual books in the slideshow along with their simulacra. So I just to show you how close they are. And by that I mean people don't generally really understand how books are made and what books really are, and so they do crazy things like they mix up style, they mash up styles of bindings, and it's endlessly humorous to me. But not everybody who looks at these things would even notice that. So I'm having fun that I get a chance to talk about it. So the first couple of topics, I'm trying to pace myself, but I have a lot of slides. There's about 80 slides. So, so do this to me if you think somebody should, you can give me a look or something. So, so I have friends in this audience, so express yourselves, kind of say, everybody. I'm ready for anything. So I tried the first couple categories that I'm showing you are sections I think are areas I think most closely relate to books, and the first category is books because it's altered books, and I don't know how to feel about altered books because I both love and hate them. As a conservator, it's painful, but you have to include them. So this is one of the earliest objects in my collection. It's an 18th century tea caddy. It's not unique. I have seen other objects, other tea caddies in this form, but not made out of books or parts of books. They're wood, the other one, and it's in the Met's collection now. And this one is an entertainment center as well as a tea caddy. It has a paper theater. And just imagine yourself having tea with your friends and having a play in your paper theater. And if you look closely, can you want to turn the lights down? Can you see the slides? Maybe it's too light, or is it does it have to be light? Only to be able to see the pictures because it's all about the pictures, I think. Doesn't that make sense to turn the lights down a little?
Yes.
Okay. Is that better?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, so here, I don't have a pointer, so I might have to point. I might have to travel, but this is the book blocks themselves are not books, they're paper, they're constructed, but there are elements of the covers of these things and the spines that were adapted from real books. And in this object, so interesting, this tea was so valuable at the time that this piece here pops out and there's a secret lock behind there, so you could lock it up. And later, much later, for the tourist trade in France in the 1920s, and in places, if any of you have been to New York, in the Grolier Club around the corner, there's a store called Sully and Sully that sells these very elegant gold tooled leather things that men put in dens or something. I don't know how it's called, like book-shaped trash cans, and you know what I'm talking about. And this is the kind of thing that a tourist may have purchased and put in their gentleman's library, or it's a cordial set, and it is made from 18th century books. So I just feel like and someone else, so all of you may know a lot more about some of these things than I do. So I really look forward to hearing your comments. So then I found this 4-page trade catalog of Blooks, which it's the only trade catalog of just Blooks that I ever found, and it's all things like this. So I put the arrow in for the cordial set, but the one thing I've never seen is the Victrola, which is so I hope one day I actually get to see the Victrola. And so these things are really popular. Like this one came from a man who lived in Albany, 𝘠𝘦𝘢𝘵𝘗, thank you, Claire, who's a paper artist. I saw it in her house and I made her give it to me, and she did. So, so I'm really honored to have it because I think it's an excellent example. And here's one that I have as well, which is, sets must have been very inexpensive in the turn of the century, old sets of books. And this is a book safe, and I've seen many of these. And the little book set in the top is the books, the same title. This around might be the same edition, but of course they all had different bindings in that time. And it did have a label from the shop that sold it, which was very interesting. Sold at the Jumping Dog. And it really is just put together with wire. Those of you who know my passion for the minutia of Blooks know that I collect very deeply in gag books, because I feel like who would if I didn't? So I have I try not to collect deeply because I collect for scope. I want one of everything. So I'm very careful to parse out my budget. But if I see a gag book, meaning an electric shock book, an exploding book, or a punchline book, I'm gonna buy it. So because I think there has to be a collection of these somewhere, and someone someday will be very interested in humor of this period. And so this is the only one that I ever saw that was a 3-volume exploding book titled Confessions by 𝘠𝑚 Beach. And it was a 4-volume set of knitting books, which I happen to own. And all these are the same volume, and only 3 fit in, because once they fitted it with the exploding fitting, which is really like a mouse trap. They would set it with an exploding cap and then close the book and then hand it to some unassuming reader, and then it would blow up in their face. And these are later ones, the altered ones. I'll show you an example of an earlier one later that was actually made by a bookbinder and designed by a binding designer, I'm sure. But I put this little picture in from Popular Science, I believe, from 1955, showing the Sam Adams factory that was one of the largest makers of exploding books, showing a woman with the thousands of books that Adams bought from publishers to fill a demand for exploding books that seemingly went on forever. Can you imagine? So these were very popular items at the time, and they go back to World War I. I mean, they start around in the teens. And then I would say goes through the 1950s. I think it's a pretty long period of time. You still can buy exploding books, but not as good. And then there's the punchline book. And the slide that I put up for you there on the far left is just the kinds of books that were purchased by these companies. And they're school books, and they are old wartime books. And they probably got them for next to nothing. So it was really inexpensive raw material. I'm just showing you that one in the middle, English and Daily Use. And to the right of it is the book adapted by the vendor with its paper label, which is the setup for the joke. It's in the bag. And then when you open the book, you get the punchline, which is always raunchy or misogynistic. So normally. So and they're assemblage, it's always a 3D assemblage. It's like it's always a printed background with some like object. It's really fun. They're really fun. And then this one was given to me by a neighbor, and it was made by her son when he was a teenager, and bought Repeat Until Rich, and then turned it into his Kindle case, and repurposing the original Kindle packaging. And the best thing about it was that he came to my house and he made a formal presentation as a gift to the collection, which I just thought was so wonderful. It graduated, from his something so pedestrian, his Kindle box, to like part of something much bigger, which was in itself very bookish. So, all right. So books made by bookbinders, this is like the tip of the iceberg, all of this stuff. So on your left is a typical school book scale board binding, a 19th century binding. And then in the Heckman collection, I found this amazing box. And I thought, why would someone make such a plain, undecorated box? Because usually when you see book boxes, there's something about them that's very special or flashy, or this is the most pedestrian, simple, plain And I thought it must be very old. It has to be, 1830s or before. And I sent it to Todd. I thought because I was lecturing here that I better be darn sure if I made some claim and speculation about something like I thought I could go with this was made by a binder, but Todd said absolutely not, because no binder would turn in the foredge before they turned in the head and tail. And also, he felt really strongly about it. And I said, okay, then I'll say it wasn't made by a bookbinder, but it could have been made by an amateur bookbinder, why not? Or somebody who saw a bookbinder working. So we don't know. So basically, there's so much to learn about these objects, and I want you to just be thinking about them and like lock on to the ones that you really love, because it's such a wide subject that there's like something for everybody. This one, I just love it because it's a slate book. I've also seen the slate books with multiple pages, multiple slates bound on the spine with this type of cover, but I just love it because it just looks so much like a school book, and the wear on it is just so somehow sentimental to me. This is another thing Todd helped me with, because I said, Todd, how do I prove that these publishers' bindings that are on the book objects were actually made by bookbinders? Because I can't imagine who else could have made them unless there was some magical case maker that made covers like, but why wouldn't that be a bookbinder? But he said, oh yes, and here's an example. And so this book on your left is so Mr. Tremblay of Danville printed this book, and he had a very small press, obviously, and he wasn't a bookbinder, and he didn't have the equipment to make the cases, so he contracted out the cases. And there's proof of that because the case itself is stamped with the name of the binder, Koch and Company, and then it has the binding ticket of someone from Danville, which is the same place as the book was printed. So so that was good enough. That should be good enough for all of you, I think, for the bibliographers to know that. And then I found this, which was because I didn't have I need a sabbatical so I can really research these things. But I was able to find this proof, at least for you, very easily, which was the Argus Bookbindery in Michigan, which had an advertisement. This is the building, had an advertisement that they made collection and pocket wallets, medical and surgical and other glass cases, and repaired them. And they also made books. So that's a kind of place I would expect if you wanted to make a book and you wanted it to really look real and you wanted a cover for it, you could go to them to make it, or at least to make the covers. But some more connections need to be made in this area. And this is the book that was on the title of my slideshow, Gutenberg, La Lumière Fut, and it is a candle, a pocket lantern. And in the 1830s, there is a patent for a pocket lantern. And this is a pocket lantern, obviously for a book lover or book collector or writer. And it's a desk lantern. It doesn't have a handle on the spine because the lantern that's patented is brass, and it has a folding handle in the spine, and in the patent it says it would be very useful for policemen and sailors to go. So it's a patrol book lantern. And I recently found one, and it was so wonderful. But just for a bonus, I threw in this amazing Baedeker's traveling inkwell, which is a tiny little inkwell from Vienna, showing St. Stephen's Cathedral, because I'm sure that whoever had that pocket lantern also had their book inkwell, traveling inkwell. But we don't know. And these are tiny little pin cushions that, to me, all over the place, they kind of said, well, they're all obviously, decorated trick publishers bindings. They're stamped gold paper. And they just reminded me so much of Cartonnage Romantique. I couldn't read the titles despite my magnifying glass. I don't know if they're real titles of books or spoofs of titles. That remains to be seen. And this is one of my favorites, the album collar made by the Reversible Collar Company in Boston, and they took it really seriously. I'm sure they commissioned, there's so many binderies in Boston. They had these covers made, and they wanted the inside of their cases to have marble paper. They took it really seriously, and they came in 4 colors that I've seen so far. Besides the red and green, there was blue and brown. And the size of the collars is on the spine of the book between the title, album, and collar. So they had them individually tooled, or either that or they left the space blank and they hand tooled in the sizes, and sometimes there's paper labels on them. But I think they're really wonderful. Oh, this one is, I just wish we had time to read the instructions for this book, but it's a box, it's a game. After I saw your author's show, I thought, oh, they're gonna love this one. It's the Magnetic Pastime in Puzzle Box. And it was made by M. Venus and Franklin Street in Manhattan, which made novelties in paper, cloth, leather, velvet, and plush. So they must have made tons of book-shaped objects that we've never seen or we don't know about, or other games. But this one has to do with animal magnetism. It requires animal magnetism, where you hold hands and somebody focuses on a card, and the person whose hand they're holding it transfers over to them, and they know what card it is, and they pick it out of the deck. And if the disclaimer is if they can't do that, the person's not succeeding at first, should not become discouraged, as a little practice will be necessary with those possessing but slight or undeveloped magnetic force. Well, I really want to play it. If anybody wants to play it with me, I'm ready to try. So, and here's one of my favorites, because no one would ever think this was not a book. It's just such a great binding. And it's Instructeur Magnétique Américain. It's a language game. The hand. Have you ever seen any magnetic games where you ask it a question and the hand goes around and points to the answer? That's how it functions. So this is the other exploding book, the earlier exploding book, made from printer's waste, with a custom designed, very beautiful cloth stamp binding. And I just love this binding. It is signed. And the paper, Kelco was this company. Kelco made a lot of exploding, it was an earlier company. They were much more before Adams. And the first company that I noticed, the earliest exploding book company, and that protective cover, and they call their books loud books. They didn't call them exploding, but they were loud books. And the cover opens and there's a little mousetrap under there, and so it gives you a little extra cover. You don't have to, you can close that before you close the book. It gives you a little extra time. I loathe and despise these bindings, and I always have, but God, they made a lot of them in the 1920s. And I heard a great lecture by Randy Silverman recently where he talked about the history of book cloth. And part of what he talked about was the very first synthetic leathers that kind of, and this is what these are in the 20s. It's like faux, plasticky faux leather, and they're always cushioned, like cushion bindings. And one on the Escape of Mr. Trim is a real book. And on the bottom left is Smoke and Ashes, which is this, and the patent for it, which I found, and it's just an ashtray and smoking set that mine has a label on it that's like gift of the so-and-so plumbing company. So it was like a Christmas, you could just picture the office this thing was on the desk. And I can, it must have, it smells bad. So moving on to bookbinding kits, because many bookbinding repair kits have been designed in the form of books, either like this, actually made as a book with real bookbinding materials, leather and cloth, or printed as a book, sort of a print, sort of a design of a book. So it looks like a book, but it's a box. Like I have other ones like this. But what's so fascinating by the care and feeding of books is I was able to find an advertisement for it that said that this was one of two variants, and this is the regular edition, and the deluxe edition was full pigskin. And I have yet to ever see a full, look for it, please, because we need to see it, but I haven't seen it and never saw it. But this is just normal, a regular edition. So even so, it seems quite elaborate. So the Crossley Book Radio, if any of you ever seen the Crossley Book Radios, there's seven of them, and they all have gold stamped leather bindings, real leather bindings. And they all have different titles, like this is fantasy. There's one named Enchantment, and it's motion activated. So like when you open the cover, the radio would play, but you can't play it now because it's a hybrid battery. It no longer exists. There is no subject that does not have a book associated with it that I can think of. I've been asking, like I go profession by profession, and I find someone who knows knowledgeable about any given profession, and I always ask them, is there a book associated with your profession? And they always come up with something. Even the Shakers, I don't think I included it here, even the Shakers that did not have musical instruments had Bible pitch pipes. And we have one. I have one. Anyway, that belonged to Lynn. So this is another one of those faux leather cushioned bindings that I'm sure was advertised in the back of a magic magazine where you could get your customized tabletop magic prop box. And this one belonged to 𝘉𝘭𝘰𝘰𝘬𝑴 Cook, who was a noted magician. He was there's a lot published about him, and this is a very silly little tabletop magic kit. So maybe it came from early in his career. I don't really know. I think this was Radio Shack made the Informer burglar alarm book, which came with a library binding. I mean, it's a gold stamp buckram binding. They had to commission these covers from a library binder, probably. I would assume like Wirt or what used to be Ocker and Schrapp, or any of those big library binders would have made these kind of objects. But it makes me laugh because of the big black dots that would be giveaway. Like any of us, if we went to someone's library, we would say, "What's that?" Right? We would immediately do that. So it's not for professionals. So gift books. So I've always loved studying 19th century publishers' bindings, and I've always loved the gift book annuals and the highly decorated books that came out since probably the 1840s with special covers and contents. And I found through looking at through these collections that there's so many of these objects that are imitating, especially the 19th century ones, and they even have the same titles. And so just here's a little collection of boxes. These are wood and glass and paper boxes, tiny little boxes, which people, I don't know if something came in them like candy, or if people could just buy the boxes as a box for to give a gift to their loved one. But they really have a nice collection of decorated papers in them. And this little pin cushion on the left is one of my favorites because whoever, I don't know what you would call it, but whoever beaded it went to great lengths to really make it look like a real book, because it has a brown leather spine and gold bands. And it's really a teeny little thing. And on the right is the gem. And the gem was a real gift, the name of an actual gift book, but it's a sewing kit. I don't need to call out all the dates on all these, do I? Can you read them? Okay, so this is just an example of the Lady's Companion, the book, which is incredibly popular for a very long time. And it must have been, if this is any way to measure that, because you could go online any day and you could see like 100 of these Ladies Companion boxes, and every single one of them is different. There were so many of them, and they're all called Ladies Companion. And what they have in them is either a sewing kit or toiletries, little useful things like an etui. And they're really lovely. I was very proud of myself when I was looking at this tiny little wooden book in Lynn Heckman's collection, Lorna Doone, and the back looks very free-form, very rustic. But when I laid eyes on the front of that cover, and it's only like 2 inches, 3 inches tall, I went, that's got to be a real book, because the design of it was just so, it was just such a book design to me. And I went online and I found it. And just this morning when I was looking at it, I didn't see the spine because the picture doesn't show the spine, but I'm sure, because I've seen it for tons of books, that they'll have like the spines indicated by printing, by the design. Why did this person make 3D bands? I thought, how interesting, because this book would have had 3-dimensional bands on the spine, but this one does. So something about his feelings about books kind of came in there. You know, he sort of put in older features of older books, or handmade books, as opposed to a commercial book, which this was. So that just piqued my interest. It's sort of like a rare book school thing to think about. So if you've ever, these are very common, these Huntley Palmer tins from the early 20th century that came out every Christmas. They made tons of them. They're biscuit tins. They were for women, for men, for children. The one on the left, when I first saw it, it was always just referred to as book. That was what it was called, by Huntley Palmer. And I'm looking at that cottage roof binding, and I'm just thinking, like, nobody would make that up. That has to be a real book. And I went on the I went to the Watson Library. In our collection, we have everything. There's nothing I've ever looked for that we don't have. It's like unbelievable. But there was this very large, beautiful book on treasures of the British Library, 19th century book. And there it was. I found it. So I was able to attribute this tin, which was very exciting. But I have not done the same for the children's book tin. So I don't know, even though they're popular titles, if those actual bindings were the real bindings or not. But I'm going to look into that. You have to pick your battles in the subject because there's just so many you can imagine. You can see how many ways there are to go. So Lowell Thing was a collector of Margaret Armstrong bindings that are now at the University of West Virginia. And he used to live 15 minutes from me, and I had a chance to look through all of those books, and he had such beautiful examples like this lavender and old lace that was in its original box with its original little gift ribbon, which they all had at the time, that it's so rare now. And then my Sense chewing gum box, and I've seen this box with all kinds of colors of ribbons. I've seen it green and pink and blue, but it's a gift book. This one, the more modern ones are kind of very fun and humorous. You all know Whitman's chocolates, a lot of you, maybe not the babies, but so they also made many types of boxes for Christmas. And this one was called the Library Package, and they swear that it's a bona fide book. And it's described as hand buffed green and gold. Like hand buff what? Like it was so interesting. And then they have I love how they have the ad on the cover for like other packages by same maker. So they're advertising the other volumes, and they have the contents page. So a lot of these candy boxes have text, and there's something really funny about that, because in the culture of this time, I'm starting to notice by looking at a lot of these candy boxes that it was very common to eat bonbons and read at the same time, especially women. And I've seen it, and I'll show you. It's in a patent. Like, we designed this because we know that women love eating bonbons with chocolates while they're reading books. So nobody could do that in my house. So if any of you have ever received the Lightsabers Sweet Storybook in your Christmas stocking, it's something that started in 1941 and has gone on, as far as I know, every year since. And for the first 7 or 8 years of it, this was the binding. It was the Grolier binding, strapwork binding in silver. And after that point, I just put a strapwork binding in for reference for those of you who may not used to seeing them. After that point, the boxes moved away from actual binding design and moved more into graphics. They were sort of commercial art. But you're still making them. You can still get them at Christmas time. Friendship's Offering is a title I love so much, and it was an incredibly popular gift book, first in England and later in America. So it started publishing in the early 1940s and in America through the 50s. And here's a Friendship's Offering daguerreotype case, which is really lovely, more lovely than the book, than the design on. I mean, you could argue it's better than the real thing. It has paper onlay. It's leather with paper onlays. It's a lovely little 4-inch clasp. And I'm just going to show you a few of these daguerreotype cases, because there were many, many daguerreotype cases with all kinds, as many bindings as there were on books. There were that many bindings on these daguerreotype cases in the form of books, and all the different materials and techniques that were used. So here's a painted lacquered binding called Memento. Here's a papier-mâché binding called the Token that someone in the 19th century probably converted into a Valentine, because there's no longer photographs in there, but two-sided Valentine. And here's a very plain one, which I like very much, called Souvenir. And it's a young man in his bicycle. And the album category is so interesting and baffling to me. The albums themselves in this era are so interesting, like all the effort and energy they put into the decoration, the creativity of making these things. But yet, in Ian Burke's collection, I saw these 2 marble albums, and I was like, and they're album sized, and they're just amazing. I went, albums must have been a lot more important than I may have thought they were, that someone would go to the trouble. I mean, I get seen a lot of Bibles out of stone, and that makes sense, but somehow seeing an album in the designs of real albums was fascinating to me. And then here's a couple also that I find interesting, because The one on the left for sure is a carte de visite box, but I was fascinated, but they still put the spring clasp on the foredge, which you really wouldn't need for a box, but you would definitely need it if it was a real album, which means to me that they really wanted people to think it was an album, an actual album, it wasn't a box. Because why would they need that? You know, unless it was just habit to put it on there, it wasn't really performing any function because you didn't have the swell like you would have in a book. Anyway, okay, so are you following me? How's it going? How's the pace? Is it good? Okay, I have no idea what time it is. But so on the left is just this tiny little purse, which is, you know, a mother's purse, obviously, with baby. And I just love it. It's very unusual. I've never seen another one. I always think everything I have never seen is very rare because I've been looking for so long. If I haven't seen it, it must be rare because I've really been looking. So, but this, so when I started bookbinding in my career, and I was an apprentice at the Center for Book Arts, and people used to walk in from the street and they would say, why are you going to make me a book? And I would like, what kind of book do you want? And they would go, a real book. And I would say, I don't know what that means when you describe to me what a real book looks like to you. And always in that time, which was the late 70s, they would say, you know, a spine and corners, a leather spine and corners. That was a real book to them. It wasn't a real book if it didn't have that. It was like serious, it was better, it was like expensive, it was the thing. And so I just think that's so interesting when I look at the book objects and I see even the slightest, like in this case, just the lines, like the slightest reference to that is, but then you notice in every generation, every era, people do have different feelings about what the real book is. You know, what's a real, if you asked a young person now, what's a real book look like to you? I have no idea what they would say. We should probably practice that. We should do that. So, because it's got to change, right? People's perception of what the importance of a book or what that means visually. So, you know, just like with the gag books, I love detective cameras, concealed cameras. And do you want to see the really good ones? They're all at the Eastman House in Rochester, New York. And there's patents on these. There are many, many kinds, single books, groups of books. They made it in all the European countries. I've seen Italian, French, English, American. This is a 3-book set. And you know, it's very important to them that they, in this case, that they are books, that they're bona fide books, which would not attract any attention. They're just so realistic. So, but okay, so it doesn't stop. It doesn't like, yeah, like, so it doesn't stop here, which it gets even crazier because in this case, and I found evidence of books that shoot bullets or that shoot book guns and book gun cameras, and here are two from completely different eras from the 19th century and from the 1960s. My favorite, the Secret Sand camera book, which has a periscope, so you can see your enemy coming. You can take their picture through your spy dictionary. It has index tabs on the foredge, and then you can shoot them. You need those. So it's just great. And that there was a precursor of that in the 19th century is just so fascinating to me. And then you see lots and lots of book enclosures relating to the storage of photographic negatives. Well, the one on the left is for glass plate negatives, and the one on the right they were completely popular with all the stereoscopic companies where they made encyclopedias with thematic stereoscopic cards, and all the companies' boxes were always books, double books like this. They competed against each other under this isn't Underwood, this is Keystone. Underwood came first and they did it first. So I had a big category here and I broke it into smaller pieces. I love the relics. Okay, so initially I thought, like, if a book object is just a solid piece of wood, or it's probably not as important as another kind of book because it's not doing anything. It's just being a book, and that's somehow not enough. But then my entire philosophy, my entire perspective really changed in one of the shows I had, the one I had in the Watson Library, because I thought, well, maybe they're even more important books because that's all they are. You know what I mean? Like, you're not trying to be anything else. It's just the most purest, simple, straightforward book icon. And whatever besides that form, that how it's decorated tells us so much about the experience that these people had that made this object in the first place. My latest pet peeve subject through doing 3 exhibitions in a year is the phrase maker unknown or unknown maker. It's like through writing, like I wrote 3 shows, 3 sets of labels for 3 exhibitions. So there were 70 books in each show. I wrote a lot of labels last year, a lot of labels. And every time I wrote Maker Unknown, I would cringe. Like I just thought, I know them. I feel like they're telling me who they are. I don't want to say they're unknown. Like I have to figure out another way to say who they are, or to like open it up, because somehow that pulled down like a wall, like saying that they were unknown. In a way, I thought might keep people from really looking at it, because the makers are talking, even though, you know, like when we make things and we may not sign them, but we put ourselves into them, right? They're part of us. They're who we are. And I think that's very important, especially in this subject, for the viewer to feel, to really just feel it intuitively. So that comes across really strongly in the relics, which are just made for no other reason that they're made from a piece of a really important tree. Or this is a Washington elm, which was an incredibly important American tree that when it came down, they cut it in pieces. They sent it to all the Masonic fraternal orders around the country, and people revered them, and some people made book objects out of them. There's a really beautiful one at Houghton Library. And this one they call it The History of the Old Elm. This one I just wrote an essay for a book that Met's publishing called Connections. I got to pick 3 things to write about in the Met's collection that I liked. So I got to delve a little deeper into this object, which is a piece of a ship that was wrecked off the Isle of Wight in 1878. And it's made from the, you know, they raised it up again. And obviously it has a picture of the ship on the back and an inverted anchor on the front, which indicates that it had problems. And that's what it indicates. And it was a really sad story because the gunnels were open, the sails were up, it was protected by the island. And when it got to the wrong, like past the shelter of the island, there was a big snowstorm and it just sunk really quickly, and over 300 men and boys were killed. And Winston Churchill saw it because he was visiting his grandparents and he was like 3 years old, and he wrote about it later. And Conan Doyle wrote a poem about it. And as soon as it happened, people started seeing ghosts. And it's still a ghost ship. And I contacted the Isle of Wight, and I wish I could read to you what this man wrote me about his visitation of the ghost ship. Like, I mean, like they're still seeing it. You know, there's a great YouTube video, a couple of great YouTube videos about sightings of the �'𝑗𝑗. And I was so excited to know that this was a piece of it. I haven't seen anyone yet. Nobody visited me yet. None of the sailors. I'm hoping they'll, maybe when the book comes out. So this one is just a very simple piece of wood, a sculpture of a WPA, a book of WPA work that somebody maybe was passing the time. I tried to see if it was copying an actual book, but I didn't find one on that looked like this from the era. I'll go fast. I should go faster. So the stone, I just love this stone book. It's History of the Black Hills. It's very large. I cannot figure out what kind of book it's imitating. I kind of feel like maybe it's sort of like an account book or something older, but I've never seen a book that looks like that. It may be a hybrid. And then if any of you know about spruce gum boxes, I put a lot of them in my Center for Book Art show under the love category, because spruce gum boxes, the lumbermen of New England, Maine especially, but other states in the North where they went out to the woods before the 1920s, before the automobile, when the lumbermen who could be farmers, you know, in the winter, they were stuck in the woods for like a month and a half, and they took with them the tools to make these book boxes, and they made hundreds and hundreds of these spruce gum boxes, which were all made the same. They were carved with an auger. They were carved out of a single, they're small little books. They were carved out of a single, usually this one's a little different because it has a slide lid on the front, but usually it's carved out of a single piece of wood, and then it has a slide lid on the top and on the bottom, and they're all decorated completely differently. And they would collect spruce gum from the trees, which was medicinal, and it could be turned into a candy or a healthful kind of thing that they would chew on. And but this one I love so much because it's the only one I've ever seen that is a book, because it's called Spruce Gum by Isaac Monson, first edition, and it made this big point of being a first edition. And then it has this lozenge motif, which I think, well, that's very essential. That is such a common book motif. I really want to meet him, so maybe he's waiting. I always think hopefully these people are all waiting for me when I die, and they're all going to be in heaven, and they're going to be saying, like, we're going to tell you all about it. But But I do try to make friends in these areas of the, I could possibly understand like how these things came to be. So I do have friends in Maine from the Maine Forestry Service who really helped me understand these things. I didn't think them here, but it helped me understand a lot of these sort of American or even Canadian crafts that are book related. There are many of them. This is Mao Zedong's An Altar. This is 4 essays on philosophy. They don't open, it's just a sculpture. This one came from an antique barn in my neighborhood, and I asked them, do you have any book objects? And he said, well, it's not for sale, but one of my staff made this for me for my birthday because she couldn't afford, the book came out and she knew I love Volvos and she couldn't afford it, so she made it for me. So here she it was like, I don't know if it's a cereal box, I'm dying to take it apart, but it feels like a cereal box or a gift box that it's construction paper, but it really does look like the book. And she did a really great job of like presenting him, what would you call that? Like a replacement, a copy or just sort of the book so he could still have it even if he couldn't read it, which I don't know, there's something very sweet about that. I was trying to think if I ever made one when I was little or not. So I don't know, this is a wacky category, but it has to go somewhere. So really just pointing out the oldest, the oldest type of book is usually this this type of box for a Bible, 11th century. Just forgot the name, it begins with a C that they're called, and slipped my mind. It's at the Cleveland Museum of Art. But it's a treasure binding and it's made just like books of that period. And then the Met has this Bennington book flask that's the Hoodoo Bible. There's many Bennington book flasks and they all look like this. They don't all have titles and some of them have other titles, but they're all spoof titles. I just love that it was a Hoodoo Bible and it's really big. I didn't put measurements in because I didn't think it was necessary for this slide talk, but I would love to share this with you at some point. This is the second oldest thing in my own collection, which is an extreme unction box for containing needs for anointing bodies of the sick and dying for last rites. And there's it's a cat's paw binding or a mottled calfskin binding. It's wood, it's painted wood. It has bowl edges. It has end bands, really fat end bands, and I didn't take a picture of the 4-edge, but there are 4-edge clasps, which somehow don't seem to fit to me with a book that looks like this. But when I see this book, it reminds me of something like the Diderot Encyclopedia. Books of that period, sort of humanist books. Some of you might have feelings about this. It doesn't say Bible to me. I don't know if it does to anybody else.
So the monstrance.
Well, oh yes, the inside of it, but I mean the binding.
Eucharist in the middle to show the sick person the Eucharist before you give the person viaticum, the food of Eucharist for their final journey. So the last rites are both the anointing, but also the giving of the food of the Eucharist. And so this opening is a monstrance to have the sick person venerate the Eucharist and then to receive it. And so it's a form of a sick kit.
Yes, but what do you think of, what does the binding say to you? I mean, what is that, do you think that binding relates at all or doesn't relate at all?
The binding says to me that the administration of viaticum to the dying in Protestant regions was considered sacrilegious because it was a Catholic rite. And the taking of the Eucharist and anointing to people, perhaps in a heavily Protestant area, needed to be obscured when the priest in Mufti was making the sick call. He could be holding what looks like an entirely secular
I completely sensed what I sensed
right?
about it, that this is not a Bible.
No,
this is trying to be like a humanist.
Yes. Like a secular book.
Thank you for oh my God, sure. I can't believe you said that. So great. Because I was like, this doesn't fit with me, this binding.
It's all good. It's my other job. We can talk.
So I thought maybe it was from a place where it wasn't cool to be Catholic and they had to hide it, and also it would disappear into a bookcase and nobody would really notice that it was there. That's kind of the feeling I had about it. Have you seen other ones like that? Have you ever seen them? No, I haven't either. There are so many stone books, American and otherwise. These are American. I just put Bibles in, but there's all kinds of stone books. And this, you may or may not have seen the Bible Regal. Did you know the Bible Regal? Michael, which is the first form of the bellows instrument, and it was a portable organ for ministers to carry around with them to different places, and there's many of them, and so the cover's pumping bellows, the bellows, and there's the keyboard, and people still like to make models of them. It's a thing for certain historical musicians. So this is the Book of Books, and I found the patent for it, and unfortunately my version, which you're seeing here, this bookcase didn't have the original slipcase. But it had a slipcase that was titled the Book of Books, a book-shaped slipcase, because it shows it in the patent. And there are many, this one is a commercial one, even though it was handmade, obviously, but this letterpress printed cover. It's pieces of wood with little synopsises of the books pasted to it. And it's for the memorization of the books of the Bible. Probably young people, I would think they would be in Sunday schools or maybe hubs. I've also seen many handmade versions of this. And the color coding, you can tell me about too, because I'm very curious, because a lot of times the pictures I see of them, or there's color coding going on. But I don't really know what that color coding means, which Michael can tell me. So
red is the Pentateuch, the other ones are the prophetic books, and so on and so forth until you get into the New Testament.
And is it
The
totally?
blue is the Apocrypha, right, and so on. So it's by the class of what it is, both for the Hebrew Bible and then the New Testament.
And is that consistent across other versions of this, or just saying in this case that that's what it is?
Well, those classifications obtain for anything. Some people are talking about the Pentateuch versus the prophetic books, for example.
But the colors associated.
The colors are completely arbitrary.
Okay, thank you so much. Wow. I just love this one because I just found a picture of it. The Story of a Pocket Bible, which might be fun to read. And it was a presentation book, a gift book from the Salvation Army to Edith Miller. And someone who presented it to her probably made an actual pocket Bible carved out of wood. And it's really sweet. Okay, this is, it's random. A lot of these objects can fit in a lot of different subjects. So I just calling this subject organization and product promotion. And I just had to put this in because there are not that many silver bindings and there's not that many silver books, but this is a really wonderful biscuit box. And I can tell you there's other ones. And there's also, I don't even want to go into it because it's too long, but it's just wonderful. And this is something I really love because it's obviously an account book, even though it has the most minimal attributes of an account book, and that it's big and fat. It just has the most subtly rounded spine, and that's the only other really bookish thing about it. So when you open it, there's a label that says it's the National Cash Register credit system, and it's for a small business, like in lieu of a different kind of system. It has cards, 50, you can have 50 cards for each customer, and you can keep track of, because in the old days nobody had credit cards and nobody could pay for anything necessarily at the end of the week, so they would just get stuff from the stores and pay it off when they could, and this is how that information was kept and organized. But I love that I didn't know the National Cash Register made this, and so it is the only one I've seen. And this is, some of you may have seen the book or know about the book Inquire Within, especially if you're British, but it was a very popular how-to book, a domestic how-to book, published first in 1856 and published for many decades, if not 100 years. I mean, there's all kinds of variants and knockoffs of it. And someone made this little sewing kit called Inquire Within, Volume 1. And I don't know if that means that just made it more interesting to them, or if they made a whole set of them. Who knows? Maybe there's more somewhere. I have an object I didn't put in the slideshow called The Lady's Fancy, which is a toiletry kit, and it's volume 17. And I always wonder, like, why didn't they make it volume 17? What does the sort of the set and the series idea do for people? It makes it feel better. And here's another account book. It's a tiny little blade bank, a razor blade bank. That is definitely an account book, and it looks exactly like the classic account book. And it spells out quality. You can count on it. You can count on those gem blades. You're not going to go wrong. And I just love that they have the title on the index tabs. Okay, so apparently in Hutchinson, Kansas, there were a lot of salt companies and they were competing. And so the Cookbook Salt Company or the Barton Salt Company decided to make their packaging, their salt boxes, which I have, but it wasn't as good shape as this needle book. This is a needle book. Were in boxes that looked like this. They made their salt in boxes because they were sort of the authoritative, best possible salt. It's better. It's telling you it's better. So I thought that that's really great. That's what my book was designed from, this object, the book that from the 𝘔𝘰𝘰𝘬𝘴. Sorry. Here's the patent for the craziest thing that I've never seen, and I hope I never do see. But it's a patent for an actual book, a whole book, not just, it's like the library package, but it's for a book that is also a candy box, because gifts of candy and books are common, and readers, especially of the feminine gender, are in the habit of eating candy when they read a book. Therefore, a book combined with a box of candy is a very acceptable and convenient novelty. Like, what a crazy idea. Has anybody ever seen one of those, like a book with actual candy ones? Thank God. But then I have this other one that is anthropomorphic, which is made from another company. It's called I'm Scotch, and it has its autobiography, like several pages when you turn the pages before you get to the candy. And I really want that. It's a genealogy book. And I just feel like this packaging for suspenders, braces, Perfectola is just reminds me, they must have been inspired by the penguin paper bags. Forever Amber, you don't have to say anything. That perfume bottle is exactly a copy of the dust jacket of the first edition. And there was this great ad for it, which I just threw in there for you, just to see how beautiful it is. It had a book, it looks like it had a bookmark topper or something, you know, like a feather or something. So over the years, I keep finding these banks, plastic banks, that are exact copies of the encyclopedias of all the different companies had these plastic banks. And in my first show at the Grolier Club, I put a few things in the show that I really wasn't sure what they were, in hopes that somebody would show up who knew what they were, just like Michael here is telling me, because that's how I know. And I thought these were promotions. So I looked for encyclopedia salesman literature and trade, you know, there are encyclopedia, you know, books for salesmen, but these never showed up in there. So I just thought they were promotional. And then I had my show at the Grolier, and one day everybody left after my tour, and there were the two guys, this is a story, I'm segueing, but it's a great story, encyclopedia story. So they're hanging out, and this man says to me, well, you're completely wrong, because that's not a promotion. It's part of the sales prop. It's a sales prop. It's part of the sales pitch. And he performed, he had been like the regional trainer of encyclopedia salesmen. And he performed alone, you know, that little sofa on the second floor of the Grolier Club. He performed for me the sales pitch for the encyclopedia. So I actually got to experience it. It was so great. And then he showed me like how, when the book came out, at the very end, after he gave his pitch, he'd pull it out of his pocket and put a quarter in it and say, so like for a quarter a day, you can have this encyclopedia. And so that's what it was. It was like a visual. So who's the other guy that was there? I was wondering. So this is a great bookstore. So I said, well, who are you? And he said, well, I'm an encyclopedia collector, but I only collect volume 1, because he would get the volumes 1s from the grocery store. Do you remember? They used to have volume 1s of certain encyclopedias. They gave them away free in the grocery store. He only had a collection of volumes. Which that's cool, you gotta say. So now when I had my show at the Met, I used to like to hang out up there a little and see who was looking in the cases. And I met this wonderful woman, Ellery Fuchs. And she's a scholar, and she was studying Titian Ramsay, and she told me about this incredible butterfly and moth collection at Drexel University, where Titian Peale, who was from, you know, a naturalist and an artist, had made this massive collection of thousands of specimens in many, many books, a giant encyclopedia of butterflies. And they're housed on 2-sided glass boxes, so you can see both sides of them. And they have these quarter leather bindings. I would love to see them. There are no good pictures of them on the internet. I couldn't get them to send me a better picture that really showed the books. But here's one that you can see. This is the a classic Grand Tour souvenir, Liberati and Pronti, which I've seen them in giant sets. I only had this one, but they came in very large sets, and they are plaster casts of art, classical, maybe Renaissance, I don't know, art metals, and they have indexes on both covers. And I guess people collected them when they were traveling so they could take a piece of Europe home with them. And my latest favorite is the Xylotech. And Xylotech is a library of wood, and they go back to the early 19th century, at the advent of forestry. And the ones that I've seen in Europe are all like the ones on the left here. They're boxes. Each book box is a different tree. And when you open the box are all the parts of the tree, the leaves, the pods, cross sections, of the branches. And then I was able to find this one, which is from the 1960s, which are 20 commercial trees from the state of Maine. And I saw one the other day that has a completely different purpose, a completely different take on it. So this was a big subject, these for studying forestry, for studying the nature of trees for industry, and it's worthy of a deeper study than I'm giving it here. So this was used on the poster, the Chiffonnet, which is everybody loves the Chiffonnet. And it came in 3, 5, and 7 volume sets, and they're recipe tins. The patent calls it a reference device. It was invented by a woman, Hazel Terry, in 1838. It was made through the 50s, a very popular bride's gift, which you could buy with cards or no cards. Some of you might know the Dennison Company. Everybody probably is. If anybody ever gave you a book, it might be one of these, because the Dennison Company of Framingham, Massachusetts, all of its packaging was book shaped. They figured that out in the 1930s. They tried it, and suddenly sales went up like crazy, and everybody wanted to buy these things and save them and give them as gifts, instead of just being in boxes, and somehow being in little libraries and book boxes made them very popular. Their archive was just rediscovered fairly recently in California. So I was able to see a lot of the salesman's literature, which I had seen earlier, but there are a lot of these sets. And then most lately, Reed Byers, who's a Roller Club member, had this exhibition of imaginary books, which were, as best as I can describe, were books that never really were, that either were books that were part of literature or written about, or books that had been known about but lost and never seen. And he created this entire library of these objects, where really they're books, because none of them are books. They're just trying to be one. So I decided to throw that in there for food for thought. And at the end is this. Okay, have any of you been to the Chapel of Chimes in Oakland, California? Everybody has to go. Everybody has to go. You won't believe it. So it's a columbarium of ashes of people in urns, and all the urns are books, and all the rooms are libraries. And if you go to the oldest rooms, and it's room after room after room, like thousands, so many rooms, you can't even believe it. And when you get to the earliest room, it was the last room that I got to, was deepest, and we were being toured by this man, and no one there seemed to recognize that they had a library. I went, it's the library. But the oldest part was really made like a classical, like the Grolier Club library, like an English college library, with the way the cases come out from, and it was like, I thought, I'm at the Grolier Club. This is like the Grolier Club in heaven or something. It was so wacky, and they didn't know anything about it. I've been trying to find, is there a historian? It was designed by Julia Morgan, who was a very popular architect, and it was designed in 1928. So she intended to make a library, and they had their own foundry there where they made the urns. And Ross Day, who used to work with us, his family is there. So there was all kinds of people there. It wasn't just librarians. And so that's the end of the slideshow, but that part of the slideshow. But I just wanted to show you some of the publications that I've tried to put out so that people can learn about the subject. So this was the catalog of my last show at the center, one on the far right. the best kept secret. I think they're sold out, but they could be convinced to print more because they made them themselves. The only reason why there isn't more is they just don't have anybody to make them. But the one in the middle is Remember Me, which is a show I had at the San Francisco Center for the Book, and it was just American carved stone books from the collection of Ian Burke. And the one on the left is my earliest book, Blooks, The Art of Books That Aren't, which I have a few copies of, and I want to give one to I'm leaving one for Rare Book School, of course. But so take a picture of these slides if you are interested. And if you want to, my other show, which was a show at the Met, emulating books, book objects from the Heckman gift, which you can come and see and play with in Watson Library. That catalog is all online. You can see it. You can look at it on that website. And I do have a haven't worked on it for a really long time, but there's a lot of material on my old blog about books. So if you're really into the subject, or if you want to order the book, you can do it through there too. But you can just, there's pages and pages, articles, things for you to look at. And then these are the other books that are not about books that you may have seen or know about, but if you're curious about them, that's that. And then I just wanted to thank, so I didn't even talk about Lynn and Bruce Heckman, but they were my friends for so many years in, who collected, and we talked all the time, and they passed away recently, and some of their collection came to the Met. I have the rest of the collection in my keeping as long as I'm using it, temporarily, but I would like to find a home for that collection if the family still wants to donate it or whatever, and also my own collection. So if there's anybody out there that really has interest, because I don't see how we can have a field of study if there's no collection to study, and that's what I'm building. I'm building a study collection. So I'm just saying, it's very important. I don't know if anybody could really recreate it at this point. I also want to thank the Rare Book School classes. I can't even believe they invited me to give this talk. It's really wonderful to have this chance to share this with you. And Katie and Laura especially, who helped me all along, had so much patience. And of course, Ken and the staff at Thomas J. Watson Library. Andriana's here who works with me, and it's just they help me all the time with everything. You don't believe the patience they have. And believe it or not, before I came here, I thought I got to show the slideshow to somebody because I don't want to just randomly show up at Rare Book School and wing it. So I called my friends who were the librarians at Vassar, Ron Patkus and Tom Hill, who have the patience of saints, and they listened to me give my slideshow, and they made very constructive suggestions. So I wanted to thank them. And if you like the subject or you think of something later, take a picture of my email, because I want to hear from you. And if you want to come and see my collection or the Heckman collection I have right now, I have over 1,500 books in my house, and I really want to share them with everyone. And if anybody has interest in a particular subject, I'm happy to pull things out and spend the day with you or hour and show you things. So I live in Tivoli, New York, and write me.
Thank you so much. Continue the conversation at a reception in Mindy's honor downstairs on the second floor in the Rare Book School suite. Please join me in thanking our speaker once again.